Well, hello, it's Sean from the Commander's Brew. This is Lagomos Hand of Hatred. Lagomos? Lagomos? It's got the Heart of a Rakdos sack deck, but it's a bit more toolboxy and there's a couple of really neat moves coming up. And Darksteel Eric's here. Oh, hey, Darksteel Eric here. Just reminding you that you need more Cheerios. You mean like the deck with a bunch of 0 mana artifact type of thing? That kind of Cheerios? No, I mean the cereal. I finished it. You need some more. You can eat? Duh. So let's start with Lagomos. 3 mana is pretty cheap. I like that. We're going to be able to cast him a couple of times. And we get a free 2/1 red elemental creature token that we will have to sack at the beginning of the next end step, which is relevant because if 5 creatures went to the graveyard this turn, we get to tutor. Assuming that little token is 1, we really only need to come up with 4 more outside of that. And honestly, it's not that hard. Jadar Ghoul Caller of Nephalia is a great example of a creature that makes a token that will sacrifice itself at some point. It's decay, so if we attack with it, it sacrifices itself at the end of combat, or it just does some damage and maybe another creature eats it or something, but either way, a creature's dying. Jax is the Troublemaker is another way to get a creature token that will sack itself because of its pseudo blitz ability. You also draw a card with that one. And then something like Determined Iteration is an enchantment, but it also does the same thing. We have to have a token already, but Lagomos makes one at least, so we're going to copy it, and it will also get sacked at the beginning of the next end step. What are you up to, like 3 things dying already? That's like 2 more. And of course, Kiki Jiki if you've got the budget for it. I mean, it is hard to put Kiki Jiki in a deck without the combos. Something like Pawn of Ulamog is an excellent card so that if your non-token creature things die, you make an extra creature that you can sack at will whenever you need. So already we've got quite a few ways to get creatures dead, but I want to tell you about a couple of neat moves here. There's a few parts to it, so bear with me. Start with a Wrath, like a classic Damnation. This one is a little bit pricey, but I do like it because it costs less. That's why it's up in there in price, because it only costs 4. Make sure Lagomos has Indestructible with something like a Darksteel Plate, or perhaps an instant like Professor's Warning using the mode to give it Indestructible. We can't use those ones where if your creature dies it comes back tapped because we won't be able to use Lagomos' tutor ability that way. It's all about the tutors. Professor Onyx would be proud. Does she feel pride? I don't know. So if you've wrapped the board and still have an Indestructible Lagomos, you're going to be able to tutor for some cool toolbox stuff. Rise of the Dread Marn. If we could have foretold this earlier, that's great. We only get to do this for a single black mana, but even if we've got 3 open, that's going to be a ton of zombies to get us through till the next turn. If we get to untap and attack with them, that's going to be some serious damage. Spoils of Blood is kind of the same, but a little bit cheaper, but you only get 1 creature, so that's the trade-off there. It should go in the deck though either way. Mahadi Emporium Master is a new legendary from Baldur's Gate that works perfectly in this deck. Under normal conditions, this card does a lot of work for us. But if we can pull off that neat move of wrathing the board while Lagomos is indestructible, we could tutor this up for 3, cast him, and then at the end step, we'll get so much treasure. And if we got a lot of mana left over, ooh, I really want to grab a Thrilling Encore. That's the dream right there. Once you do this, you can retire the deck. Another fairly pricey card, but Final Fortune is interesting to tutor for. If we've already got something like Rise of the Dreadmarn in hand and we're going to make a board full of zombies, I might want to tutor for something like this to get the extra turn, which is a way of giving them all haste. I mean, honestly, just get Anger in the graveyard. That's going to be your best move to give your team haste, in my opinion. So what if we want to do it by ourselves? What if we're not looking to wrath the board and give an indestructible Lagomos? I mean, I'm looking to do that, but what if it just isn't feasible right now? How many more ways can we make a bunch of creature tokens that sack? Chandra Acolyte of Flame has a built-in ability that makes 2 creatures, elementals, and we have to sack them at the beginning of the next end step. There's another 2. Chittering Witch is a fine creature to bring a few little rats with her, as well as being a sack outlet herself. Endrixar is probably the #1 token maker for black decks. Every time we cast a creature, as long as it's less than a 7 mana creature, we can get a whole bunch of thralls out there. I'm not going to talk about all the sack outlets, but the usuals should go in here. Viscera Seer, Ashnod's Altar, Phyrexian Altar if you got the money. And don't forget about Plum the Forbidden. This card kind of went under the radar for a while with Strixhaven, but this is an incredible card. At its worst, it's a 2 mana draw card, lose a life, but if there's a Wrath coming, again, not our shenanigans Wrath, a normal Wrath that our opponents play, we can preemptively sack a lot of our little board creatures to get a whole bunch of cards that way. We lose some life, but you be the judge. How many cards do you want? It only costs 2 mana either way. Wake the Dead is an especially useful card because it is one of the few effects that will put things onto the battlefield that we actually sacrifice at the next end step. We have to do it on combat on an opponent's turn, but that kind of doesn't matter. We'll get a few ETB abilities probably, and most importantly, we'll get those 5 creatures dying so that we can activate Lagomos. You know, so many of those little cards that make a whole bunch of little 1/1 elementals until end of turn, they actually exile them at the end of the turn. I hadn't noticed that until I was really looking for it. Too bad. You can probably get a large portion of this list by looking up a good Judith the Scourge Diva list. Obviously, Judith belongs on the 99, making our creatures bigger, and again, we're sacking so many things, doing extra damage is good. And the newly printed Garna Bloodfist of Keld puts a really interesting spin on these things. It's incentivizing attacks, and our opponents kind of have to do something about it. If they chump, we end up drawing cards, but if they just take it, well, they're taking damage. And we can hold priority at the end of combat step after damage and still sack our things and draw cards with them if we want. And if they die any other time, 1 damage to each opponent. Thanks, Garna. So let's look at some other ways to get 5 creatures in the bin. Priest of Forgotten Gods. Let's do the math together. You tap her and sacrifice 2 of your creatures. That's 2. 3 of our opponents each sack a creature. Well, that's 5 right there. And we still got that little elemental if we want. That's probably one of the ones I sacrificed. Fleshbag Marauder and all those clones, they will be 5 if you count the Fleshbag and the creature from each of our 3 opponents. That makes 4, and that little elemental is the 5th one. The elemental sacking itself does happen during the end step, so that means we'll probably have to grab it instant if we want to use it right now. Otherwise, just grab the coolest thing you got. Hex is overkill by exactly 1, but you have to have 6 valid targets. You can't cast this if you can't target 6 different creatures. Turgrid's Shadow, if we can foretell it, that's great, but each player sacrificing 2 creatures, well, that's 8 on a typical board. If your opponents aren't playing any creatures, though, these cards don't do as much. Liliana Dreadhorde General, another each player sacrificing 2 creatures. And this card's over $20 now. Geez, people love Liliana. Taste of Death is a sorcery that makes each player sacrifice 3 creatures just in case one player isn't holding up their end of the bargain. And then Fraying Omnipotence will certainly have people sacrificing at least creatures to sum up to 5. If you got 10 mana after casting, this is when you go get the Thrilling Encore, probably. Vona's Hunger is a nice way to do this with Ascend because then only the opponents are sacking creatures and half of the creatures they own rounding up. This card's probably underrated too. Oh, maybe not, it's $5. And then Pestilence or Pyrohemia is another great way just to do a lot of damage to creatures. And since Lagomos has 3 toughness, we get to do 2. Anything with 2 toughness or less will be destroyed, and if there's a ton of tokens out there, we'll get all of them. Golden Demise, similarly, our opponent's creatures get -2/-2. And Demon of Dark Schemes is another effect that when it enters, it gives all the creatures -2/-2 until end of turn. Lagomos survives. It's a pretty cool demon. I'll come back to that. So let's talk about some of the toolbox stuff. We got a tutor in the command zone, so we got to think about cards that we want to put in the deck that will come in real handy under special circumstances. Rakdos Charm, a classic, namely for that 3rd mode where we can have each creature deal 1 damage to its controller. A little bit dicey for us, but there are situations where a player's board is wide enough that this 1 card can do them 15 plus damage. If they've got infinite somehow with infinite creatures, I love casting a Rakdos Charm on that. Chaos Warp, another classic to deal with troublesome permanents of any type. Deflecting Swat if you're a millionaire. A simple Terminate if you're looking to get rid of a creature, or a Bedevil to give us a few more options with artifacts and planeswalkers. And then Soul Shatter is a nice option to include because it always gets the highest mana value creature. People can't sacrifice their little things. It's quite often the highest mana value creature is the one we want gone anyway. Crypt Incursion is an interesting toolbox card. If we can grab this at instant speed with a few sacrifices, we might be able to nab all the creatures out of a graveyard during a crucial play. Plus we gain a ton of life. Maybe you do this for the life gain only. And then Tragic Slip is one of the ideal cards to go toolbox for in a pinch. 5 creatures had to die for Lagomos to be able to tutor for this, so you know Morbid has been reached, and there are very few things that get around a -13/-13 until end of turn. And it's a single black mana. Hey, me again, Darksteel Eric, just reminding you to like and subscribe. It really helps out Darksteel Industries. And now, 2 ads, 1 fake, 1 real. Do you ever cook? Then you know that having the perfect tool for the job is essential. Well, you'll need the Darksteel Kitchen Tool. It doesn't slice, it doesn't dice. It only does one thing, but if you know what that job is, you'll love it. Trust us. Sheoldred knows what I'm talking about. Am I right, Sheoldred? It's worth it. I think Gordon Ramsay has one of these. You should get one. And now the real ad from the Wizard's Tower. wizardtower.com. They've got all your article and cool deck tech needs over at wizardtower.com. And if you visit their store as a Canadian viewer, you can get a discount code, BrewUnited, to get 5% off all your Magic singles if you spend $20 or more. That's a very versatile coupon. And now back to the show. So we've got some fun ways to kill 5 or more creatures, and we've got a whole bunch of toolboxy things. But there's another way to get a lot of creatures into the graveyard at the same time. I'm not talking about more wraths. I'm talking Shadowborn Apostles. You know the one. These are the cards that were commons, and they ended up costing like almost $5 because they're one of those cards where everyone needs like 35 of them to make a deck. Anyway, you sack 6 of them for a single black, and you get to put out a demon. I don't need to remind you that 6 creatures is more than 5, which triggers Lagomos' tutor ability. Plus, we get a free demon right to the battlefield. And since Lagomos is red, we get access to red and black demons. And if you can't afford Shadowborn Apostles because they're just a little bit too pricey at $2 a piece, I'm a fan of going for something like 30 Stronghold Confessors. It's another 1 mana 1/1. It's also a human cleric. The ability is different, but I don't think anyone's going to confuse them. If your playgroup's not cool with it, I don't know what to tell you. And of course, if you're doing a Shadowborn Apostles deck, you're going to want to run a Thrumming Stone so that hitting one of those Shadowborn Apostles probably hits a bunch of them. You're going to want to run Shirei Shizo's Caretaker so that they all come back into your hand. Sorry, not hand, right to the battlefield. This is a very good card. I think Command the Dreadhorde is also worth running. It's a little bit hefty at 6 mana, but we only need to pay 6 life to get all of our apostles back for another demon. And maybe you throw in a few life for a key creature from another graveyard while we're at it. So let's talk red demons. Sire of Insanity's cool. Once we're set up, I probably think we can manage just having everyone lose their hand. If we're able to tutor something up, that's kind of all you need. Master of Cruelties is a fantastic little demon that can kill players basically with 1 hit. It's a threatening demon. Remember I said we had anger before? You probably want it in this deck too, and if you can drop this thing and get in a hit on an empty board, whew, if they don't see it coming, dangereux. Balor is an interesting one. I was actually a bit surprised to find out there weren't a ton of just mono red demons. Balor is one, it's a new one, and it does some pretty good stuff to our opponents. Obviously, you have to pick different ones for each, and you'll pick the one that is most appropriate for the opponent you're targeting with it. Not a bad deal. Rakdos the Showstopper is a fine demon to find with all those apostles because once you've sacked 6 of them, you probably don't have a ton more on the battlefield, and the rest of your board's probably demons of some kind, so this is going to be pretty good for you. Obviously, all the Rakdoses are red, and they're demons. That includes Rakdos the Defiler. This is a tricky card to get work because you just have to sacrifice so much of your board merely to attack. And then if your opponents deal with it before you do any damage, that just sucks. I haven't looked at this card in a long time, and there are ways now to cheat it in. Delina Wild Mage. When we attack with this 3/2, we roll a d20, and we will be choosing Rakdos the Defiler. If we roll low, we're going to make another token copy of it, not legendary, that says it's tapped and attacking. We're not going to attack with the first one. We're going to attack with Delina, and then she's going to make a token that gets around the attack clause. We didn't pay anything to attack with them. And if we roll high enough, we can make another one of those tokens. Maybe we got that indestructible trick to protect Delina so we can keep doing this. I mean, it's kind of fun to see if we can brew around Rakdos the Defiler anyway. But alas, I dug real deep, and there are so few ways to get that creature to skip its attack phase and still be attacking. Ilharg the Razeboar is another way to make it happen. But it's just those 2 as far as I know. So that's Lagomos. Pretty tight commander for an uncommon. Let me know in the comments what your favorite Rakdos toolbox cards are. I'm sure there's something I'm not thinking of here. But I want to give a sincere thanks to everyone who helped out in the Discord. Find out how you can get involved in the Discord by going to patreon.com/commandersbrew. And of course, in the meantime, you keep being you. The world is a better place for it. See you next time.